The moment Elena Vasquez pulled the unconscious man from the overturned SUV, she had no idea she was holding the hand of someone who would change her life forever, or that the small boy trapped in the back seat had stopped breathing. The blizzard howled at -11 degrees Celsius, visibility had dropped to near zero, and Elena knew with terrifying certainty that if she made a single wrong decision in the next 5 minutes, all three of them would die on this forgotten mountain road. Elena was 23 years old, with warm olive skin weathered by years of hard work, her dark brown hair whipping violently beneath a faded wool beanie that had belonged to her late grandmother. She wore a patched second-hand coat, 2 sizes too large, over threadbare layers that did little against the merciless cold. Her worn boots had holes near the toes, wrapped with plastic bags to keep out the snow, the boots of a girl who had known poverty her entire life. Her fingers, already turning red and stiff, fumbled with the child's seatbelt as she screamed into the wind, knowing that the nearest hospital was 45 minutes away and her battered pickup truck was almost out of gas. What she didn't know, what would haunt her for days, was why this luxury vehicle was on this abandoned road in the first place, and who was hunting them. The man regained consciousness just as Elena freed his son from the crushed vehicle. His eyes, steel gray and sharp despite his obvious concussion, locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was perhaps 35, tall even while slumped against the snowbank, with a strong jaw and dark hair matted with blood from a gash above his eyebrow. His expensive wool coat was torn, his leather shoes completely impractical for the weather, and yet even injured and vulnerable, he carried himself with an unmistakable authority. "My son," he gasped, his voice raw with desperation. "Please, Marcus, is he?" "He's breathing now," Elena said, cradling the small boy against her chest. Marcus appeared to be around 5 years old, with the same dark hair as his father, his small face pale as porcelain against Elena's patched coat. She had performed CPR for what felt like an eternity, in reality, perhaps 90 seconds, until his tiny chest had finally risen on its own. "But we need to move. Now. This storm is going to bury us." The man tried to stand and immediately collapsed. Elena caught him with her free arm, staggering under his weight while still holding Marcus. The wind screamed around them, the snow so thick it felt like drowning in white. Her truck was 200 meters away. She had been driving home from her night shift at the diner when she'd spotted the overturned vehicle, its headlights cutting weakly through the blizzard. "Can you walk if you lean on me?" she asked, her teeth chattering violently. He nodded grimly, wrapping one arm around her shoulders. Together, they began the agonizing journey to her truck, every step a battle against the wind that seemed determined to knock them down. Elena's legs burned, her lungs ached, and she could feel the dangerous numbness spreading through her fingers and toes. Marcus whimpered against her chest, his small hands clutching weakly at her coat. "What's your name?" the man asked through gritted teeth, his breath forming desperate clouds in the frozen air. "Elena. Elena Vasquez. I'm Daniel. Daniel Harrington." He paused, nearly slipping on an ice patch before she steadied him. "You're saving our lives." "Let's make sure I actually do before we celebrate," she replied, but despite the dire circumstances, something warm flickered in her chest at the gratitude in his voice. They reached her truck, a rusted 1998 Ford that she had kept running through sheer determination and YouTube repair tutorials. Elena settled Marcus in the back seat, wrapping him in the emergency blankets she always kept there, then helped Daniel into the passenger seat. His gray eyes watched her every movement with an intensity that made her self-conscious of her poverty, of her taped-together boots and her coat that smelled faintly of the diner's kitchen. "There's a cabin," she said, starting the engine and praying it would turn over. It coughed twice, then roared to life. "My grandfather's old place. 20 minutes from here. We'll never make it to town in this storm, but we can shelter there until it passes." Daniel nodded weakly, his eyes flickering to his son in the rearview mirror. "Is he going to be okay?" "He's breathing, his color is coming back, and children are resilient." Elena pulled onto the road, or what she hoped was the road beneath all the snow. "But he needs warmth, fluids, and rest. You both do. That head wound needs attention too. You know first aid? I know survival, she said simply. When you grow up poor, you learn to handle things yourself or you don't make it. The drive to the cabin was harrowing. Twice, Elena nearly drove off the road. Once, a fallen tree branch forced her to reverse and find an alternate route through a snow-covered field. Through it all, Daniel remained conscious, talking to keep himself awake, asking her questions about her life, where she worked, where she lived, why she was driving this road alone at night in a blizzard. I work 3 jobs, she admitted, her eyes fixed on the barely visible path ahead. Night shift at the diner, morning cleaning at the hotel, and weekends I do bookkeeping for small businesses. This road is a shortcut to my apartment. Saves gas. 3 jobs, Daniel repeated quietly. When do you sleep? Sleep is a luxury, Elena said with a tired smile. Like health insurance. Like reliable heating. Like new boots. She glanced at her plastic-wrapped feet. You do what you have to do. Finally, the cabin emerged from the white chaos, a small wooden structure with a stone chimney, nearly buried in snowdrifts. Elena's grandfather had built it 40 years ago, and she had maintained it after his death, coming here sometimes when the weight of her life became too heavy. It wasn't much, but it had a working fireplace, a generator, and enough supplies to last several days. Getting Daniel and Marcus inside took every ounce of strength she had left. She laid Marcus on the worn couch near the fireplace, piling blankets on top of him, then helped Daniel to the only armchair. Her hands, numb and clumsy, struggled to start the fire, but eventually flames crackled to life, casting warm orange light across the small cabin. For the next several hours, Elena worked tirelessly. She cleaned and bandaged Daniel's head wound, made warm broth for Marcus when he woke crying and confused, monitored them both for signs of hypothermia or worse. Outside, the blizzard raged with terrifying intensity, but inside the cabin, warmth slowly returned to their frozen bodies. Marcus fell asleep clutching Elena's hand, unwilling to let go of the woman who had pulled him from the wreck. Daniel watched from the armchair, his gray eyes following her every movement with an expression she couldn't quite read. You should rest too, he said softly, as the fire crackled between them. You've done enough. I'm fine. Elena tucked another blanket around Marcus. Someone needs to keep the fire going. Elena. His voice was gentle but firm. When was the last time someone took care of you? The question struck her like a physical blow. She couldn't remember. Her mother had died when she was 12. Her father had left before that. Her grandfather had passed 3 years ago, leaving her this cabin and a small amount of debt that had taken her 2 years to pay off. She had been taking care of herself for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be taken care of. That's not important, she said, her voice thick. It's the most important thing. Daniel leaned forward, wincing at the pain in his head. I've spent my entire adult life building a company, making money, acquiring power. And tonight, I nearly died on a forgotten road with my son, and none of that mattered. What mattered was you, a stranger who stopped in a blizzard, who risked her life for people she'd never met. His eyes glistened in the firelight. Why did you stop? Elena was quiet for a long moment. Because I know what it's like to be alone in a storm with no one coming to help, she finally said. Because my mother froze to death in a hospital waiting room when I was 12, because we couldn't afford the emergency room fees and the waiting room was the only warm place we could find. Because I made a promise to myself that if I ever had the chance to help someone the way no one helped us, I would. Daniel's face crumpled with grief that seemed too profound to be just about her story. Marcus's mother died in a car accident, he whispered. 3 years ago. A storm, not unlike this one. I wasn't there. I was in a meeting, while he couldn't finish. I'm sorry, Elena said softly. I've been trying so hard to protect him from everything, Daniel continued, his voice breaking. Hired the best security, the best drivers, the safest vehicles. And tonight, none of it mattered. The driver lost control on the ice. We went over the embankment. If you hadn't found us. He shook his head. You appeared out of nowhere, like an angel in a blizzard. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. I'm no angel. Just a tired waitress with a loud truck engine who happened to see your headlights. That's exactly what an angel would say, Daniel replied, and despite everything, he smiled. That smile transformed his face, softened the hard lines of grief and stress, revealed a warmth beneath the exterior of power and control. Elena found herself smiling back, and for a moment, the howling wind outside faded, and there was only the crackling fire and this unexpected connection between two people from completely different worlds. But even as warmth filled the cabin, Elena couldn't shake the question that had been nagging at her since she'd found the wreck. Daniel, she asked carefully, why were you on that road? It leads nowhere. It's not a route to anywhere important. And your driver, where is he? Daniel's expression darkened immediately. The warmth vanished, replaced by something guarded and afraid. The driver ran, he said slowly. When we crashed, he ran. And Elena, we were on that road because someone was chasing us. A chill ran down Elena's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Chasing you? Who? Before Daniel could answer, Marcus screamed. Elena spun around to find the little boy sitting upright on the couch, his eyes wide with terror, pointing at the window. Through the frost-covered glass, barely visible through the swirling snow, she could see headlights. A vehicle was approaching the cabin. And somehow, impossibly, in the middle of the worst blizzard in decades, someone had found them. Get Marcus into the back room, Daniel commanded, struggling to his feet despite his injuries. There's a storage space behind the bookshelf. My father told me about places like this. Hide him there. Don't come out, no matter what you hear. Who are they? Elena demanded, even as she scooped Marcus into her arms. Daniel's face was pale, not from injury but from fear. People who want to take my son from me. People who will do anything, hurt anyone, to get what they want. My company is worth billions, Elena. And there are those who believe Marcus is the key to controlling it. The headlights grew closer. Elena's heart pounded violently against her ribs as she carried the trembling boy toward the back of the cabin. Marcus's small arms wrapped around her neck, and she felt his tears hot against her cold skin. Don't let them take me, he whispered. Please, please don't let them take me. I won't, Elena promised fiercely, though she had no idea how she would keep that promise. I won't let anyone hurt you. She found the storage space, a hidden compartment her grandfather had built during a time when he'd feared government overreach. It was cramped, dark, and cold, but it was invisible from outside. She settled Marcus inside, cupping his face in her hands. Stay here, she instructed. Stay quiet. Don't come out until your father or I come for you. Do you understand? Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. But what about you? Elena's heart shattered at the fear in his voice, at this small boy who had lost his mother, who had nearly died tonight, who was now hiding in darkness while strangers came to take him away. She thought of herself at 5 years old, huddled in closets while her parents fought, wondering if anyone in the world would ever protect her. I'm going to be fine, she said with a confidence she didn't feel. And so is your father. We're going to protect you, Marcus. No matter what. She slid the panel closed and hurried back to the main room, where Daniel stood by the window, his body tense with readiness despite his obvious pain. The headlights had stopped. Through the swirling snow, Elena could make out figures emerging from a large black SUV, 3, maybe 4 people, moving toward the cabin. You should hide with Marcus, Daniel said without turning around. There's no reason for you to. No. Elena's voice was steady, surprising even herself. I didn't pull you out of that wreck to abandon you now. And I promised your son I'd protect him. I keep my promises. Daniel turned to look at her then, and something shifted in his gray eyes, something profound and raw and beautiful. Elena Vasquez, he said softly, I don't know what I did to deserve you walking into my life tonight. You didn't do anything, she replied. I just happened to be driving by. No. He shook his head. There's no such thing as coincidence. Not like this. The pounding on the door shattered the moment. A voice bellowed through the wood, harsh, demanding, threatening. We know you're in there, Harrington. Open the door, and no one gets hurt. Daniel grabbed Elena's arm, pulling her toward the back of the cabin. There's a cellar door, he whispered urgently. Outside, behind the woodpile. My security team is tracking my phone, they'll be here soon, but we need to buy time. How soon? Elena asked. I don't know. An hour. Maybe more in this storm. An hour. Elena's mind raced. The front door was solid oak, her grandfather had built it to withstand anything, but it wouldn't hold forever. The windows were small, but not impenetrable. And if there were 4 men outside, armed and determined. I have an idea, she said suddenly. But you're not going to like it. I already don't like any part of tonight. Elena's plan was desperate, dangerous, and probably foolish, but it was the only chance they had. She would go out the front door, pretend to be a confused local who had stumbled upon the cabin during the storm. She would claim she hadn't seen anyone, would offer to let them search if they let her leave. It would buy time, maybe enough for Daniel's security team to arrive. Absolutely not, Daniel said immediately. I won't let you risk your life. It's not your choice. Elena was already moving toward the front door. Get Marcus and get to the cellar. I'll meet you there when it's safe. Elena, he grabbed her hand, and the contact sent electricity through both of them. His grip was warm despite the cold, strong despite his injuries. Please. I can't let anything happen to you. You barely know me. I know enough. His voice cracked with emotion. I know you're the most incredible person I've ever met. I know you appeared in a blizzard like something from a dream. I know that if you walk out that door and something happens to you, I will never forgive myself for the rest of my life. Elena's eyes burned with tears she couldn't afford to shed. Then make sure Marcus is safe, she said softly, so that when I come back, it will have been worth it. She opened the door before he could stop her. The cold hit her like a wall of knives. The men on the porch, 4 of them, dressed in black tactical gear, spun toward her with weapons raised. Elena threw her hands up, making herself small, terrified, innocent. Please, she cried, her voice cracking with manufactured panic that wasn't entirely an act. Please don't hurt me. I was just sheltering from the storm, I didn't see anyone, I swear. The leader, a broad man with cold eyes and a scar across his chin, studied her with suspicion. Who else is in there? No one. I'm alone. I was driving home from work and my truck broke down and I found this cabin and, Elena let herself cry, let the terror of the night spill out through tears that weren't entirely fake. Please, I just want to go home. I don't know anything about anyone. For a terrible moment, she thought he didn't believe her. His eyes narrowed, his hand tightened on his weapon. But then one of the other men spoke, something about the truck outside matching her story, something about the crash site being miles away, something about their intel being wrong. Search the cabin, the leader ordered. You, stay right here. Elena's heart nearly stopped as 2 of the men pushed past her into the cabin. She could hear them moving through the rooms, throwing open doors, overturning furniture. She prayed Marcus had stayed silent, prayed Daniel had made it to the cellar, prayed that her grandfather's hidden compartment remained hidden. The minutes stretched into eternity. The leader kept his weapon trained on her, his eyes never leaving her face. Elena trembled, from cold, from fear, from the weight of everything resting on her shoulders. She thought of Marcus's tear-stained face, of Daniel's desperate gray eyes, of the connection that had sparked between them in the firelight. She thought of her mother, dying alone in a waiting room. She thought of herself, alone for so many years. She thought that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found something worth fighting for. The men emerged from the cabin empty-handed. Nothing, one reported. Just old furniture and a lot of dust. The leader swore viciously. He took a step toward Elena, his eyes dangerous. You're sure you didn't see anyone? A man and a boy? I told you, I didn't see anyone. Please, just let me go. I won't say anything to anyone, I swear. For an agonizing moment, she thought he would kill her anyway. But then the other man spoke again, something about the blizzard intensifying, something about losing their window, something about the GPS signal moving away from this location. The leader swore again, then turned away. We're leaving, he commanded. The signal's heading toward the main road. They must have had another vehicle. Elena collapsed against the door frame as the men piled back into their SUV and disappeared into the storm. Her legs shook so violently she could barely stand. She had done it. She had bought them time. But for how long? She found Daniel and Marcus in the cellar, huddled together in the darkness. Marcus cried out with relief when he saw her, and Daniel crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms so tightly she couldn't breathe. You're insane, he whispered against her hair. You're absolutely insane. It worked, didn't it? He pulled back just enough to look at her face, and what she saw in his eyes made her heart stop. You could have died, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You put yourself between armed men and a boy you'd known for hours. Why? Elena thought about the question, really thought about it. Why had she risked everything for strangers? Why had she felt such an overwhelming need to protect them? Because, she said slowly, when I looked at Marcus, I saw myself. And when I looked at you, I saw someone I couldn't bear to lose. The moment hung between them, charged with something electric and terrifying and beautiful. Then Daniel cupped her face in his hands, and even in the dark cellar, she could see the tears in his eyes. Elena Vasquez, he breathed, I am going to spend the rest of my life thanking whatever force brought you to us tonight. They survived the night in the cellar, huddled together for warmth while the blizzard raged above them. Marcus slept between them, finally peaceful, his small hand clutching Elena's even in sleep. Daniel stayed awake, watching over them both, his gray eyes soft in a way Elena suspected few people ever saw. Sometime before dawn, the storm began to subside. And when the sun rose, painting the snow-covered world in shades of gold and pink, they emerged from the cellar to find a fleet of black vehicles parked outside the cabin. Men in suits surrounded the property, but these men were different. These men nodded respectfully to Daniel, checked on Marcus with genuine concern, looked at Elena with curiosity and gratitude. Sir, one of them said, we've been searching all night. We thought. We're fine, Daniel interrupted. Thanks to this woman. All eyes turned to Elena, and she suddenly became acutely aware of her appearance, her tangled hair, her patched coat, her plastic-wrapped boots. She must look ridiculous next to these professional, polished men. She must look exactly like what she was, a poor girl who had stumbled into something far beyond her world. But Daniel took her hand in his, and suddenly none of that mattered. Elena saved our lives, he said, his voice carrying to every person present. Multiple times. She risked everything for us. Whatever she needs, whatever she wants, she gets. Do you understand? A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the security team. But Elena barely heard it. She was looking at Daniel, at this man who had crashed into her life literally and figuratively, at the way the morning light caught his gray eyes and turned them silver. I don't want anything, she said quietly. I just did what anyone would do. No. Daniel's grip on her hand tightened. You did what almost no one would do. And I intend to spend considerable time making you understand how extraordinary that is. The next few hours passed in a blur. Elena was examined by a private doctor who pronounced her exhausted but healthy. Marcus was taken to a hospital for observation, though his scans came back clear. Daniel's head wound required stitches, but he refused to leave Elena's side while they were administered. And then came the question Elena had been dreading: what happens now? They were sitting in a private hospital suite, a room nicer than any apartment Elena had ever lived in. Marcus was asleep in the adjacent room, monitors beeping steadily. Daniel sat across from Elena, his eyes never leaving her face. Now, he said slowly, I have to tell you something. Several somethings, actually. Elena's heart clenched. Here it came, the goodbye. The thank you for everything, here's some money, have a nice life. She had been foolish to think. My name is Daniel Harrington, he continued. I'm the CEO of Harrington Technologies. We develop medical devices, communication systems, renewable energy solutions. Our company is worth approximately $43 billion. Elena's breath caught. She had known he was wealthy, the SUV, the security team, his bearing, but $43 billion. The men who chased us last night are connected to my former business partner. He believes that by controlling Marcus, through custody, through leverage, through whatever means necessary, he can force me to sign over portions of the company. Daniel's jaw tightened. He's been trying for 2 years. Last night was his most aggressive attempt yet. Will it stop? Elena asked. Now that his men failed? It will stop when I end it permanently. And I will. Daniel's eyes blazed with protective fury. No one threatens my son and walks away. Elena nodded slowly, processing everything. And what about us? The word hung in the air, heavy, hopeful, terrifying. Daniel leaned forward, taking both her hands in his. Elena, I've known you less than 24 hours. In that time, you've saved my life, saved my son's life, faced armed criminals without flinching, and shown more courage than anyone I've ever met. His voice dropped to a whisper. You're also the first person to see me, not my money, not my company, not what I can do for them. Just me. A terrified father in a blizzard. I liked that version of you, Elena admitted. Before I knew about the billions. That version is still me. The billions are just noise. Daniel squeezed her hands. I'm not asking for anything immediate. I know this is overwhelming. But I'm asking, would you let me know you? Really know you? Would you give me the chance to prove that what I feel right now isn't just gratitude? Elena's heart raced. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was insane, that people from different worlds didn't end up together, that fairy tales didn't come true, that she was just a tired waitress with patched boots and too many jobs. But then she remembered the way he'd looked at her in the firelight. The way he'd held her in the cellar. The way Marcus had clung to her like she was the only safe thing in his world. Yes, she whispered. I'd like that. Daniel's smile could have melted every snowflake in the blizzard. He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed them gently, a promise, a beginning. 6 months later, Elena stood on the balcony of Daniel's penthouse, watching the city lights sparkle below. So much had changed since that frozen night. Daniel had kept every promise, the business partner had been exposed and arrested, Marcus was thriving in therapy and school, and the security threats had been neutralized. And Elena? Elena had allowed herself to be loved. It hadn't been easy. The transition from poverty to privilege was disorienting, sometimes painful. She had struggled with feeling out of place, with accepting help, with believing she deserved any of it. But Daniel had been patient, persistent, endlessly understanding. He never tried to change her, he simply created space for her to grow. She still worked, though differently now. Daniel had helped her start a foundation, the Maria Vasquez Foundation, named after her mother, that provided emergency assistance to families in medical crises. They had already helped over 300 families avoid the waiting room tragedy that had taken her mother. "Mom?" Marcus's voice came from behind her. In the months since the blizzard, the little boy had started calling her that, first tentatively, then with increasing confidence. The first time he'd said it, Elena had cried for an hour. She turned to find Marcus in his pajamas, clutching a stuffed bear that had been a gift from Daniel. "What are you doing up, sweetheart?" "I had a dream," he said, shuffling toward her. "A good one." "I dreamed about the cabin, and the snow, and you finding us." Elena knelt down to his level, smoothing his dark hair. "That was a scary night. But also magic," Marcus said seriously. "That's what Dad says. He says you were our magic in the snow." Elena's eyes burned with tears. "Your dad is very poetic. He's also right." Daniel appeared in the doorway, watching them with an expression of such profound love that Elena's heart ached. "You are our magic, Elena. Every single day." He crossed to them, lifting Marcus into his arms and wrapping his free arm around Elena. The three of them stood there, silhouetted against the city lights, a family forged in ice and fire and impossible circumstances. "I love you," Elena whispered, and she wasn't sure if she was saying it to Marcus, to Daniel, or to both. "I love you too," they said in unison, then laughed at the synchronicity. "I have something for you," Daniel said, setting Marcus down and reaching into his pocket. Elena's breath caught as he produced a small velvet box. "I know this is fast. I know we come from different worlds. I know there will be challenges and obstacles and people who don't understand. But I also know that I have never been more certain of anything in my life." He opened the box to reveal a ring, not the enormous diamond Elena might have expected from a billionaire, but a simple band of white gold with 3 small sapphires. "Blue like the ice that brought us together," Daniel explained. 3 stones for the 3 of us." Elena couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face as Daniel took her hand. "Elena Vasquez, you saved my life in more ways than you know. You showed me what courage looks like, what selflessness means, what love can be when it's pure and unconditional. You became a mother to my son before you even knew his name. You made me believe in fate, in miracles, in the idea that sometimes the universe puts exactly the right person in exactly the right place. Say yes, Mom." Marcus bounced excitedly. "Say yes." Elena laughed through her tears. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that held all the promise of their future, a future she had never dared to imagine, built on a foundation of sacrifice, courage, and love. They were married the following spring in a small ceremony at her grandfather's cabin, now fully restored, a monument to the night that changed everything. Marcus served as ring-bearer, clutching the simple gold bands with adorable solemnity. Elena wore her grandmother's veil, the only heirloom she had left from her family. And as she and Daniel exchanged vows, the sun broke through the clouds and bathed the mountain in golden light, as if the universe itself was blessing their union. 1 year later, Elena sat in a hospital room, a very different experience from her mother's death in a waiting room. This room was warm, comfortable, filled with flowers and the soft beeping of monitors. In her arms, she held their newborn daughter, Sophia Maria Harrington, named for hope and memory. Daniel sat beside her, Marcus curled in his lap, all of them staring at the tiny miracle with matching expressions of wonder. "She has your eyes," Daniel murmured, touching Sophia's tiny hand. "And your stubborn chin," Elena replied with a tired smile. "I'm going to protect her forever," Marcus declared solemnly. "Like you protected me, Mom." Elena's heart overflowed with a love so vast it felt cosmic. She looked at her family, words she had never thought she would say, and marveled at the path that had brought them here. She had started that night as a poor girl in plastic-wrapped boots, driving a dying truck through a blizzard, wondering if her life would ever amount to anything more than survival. She had ended that night as someone's miracle. And now, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, she understood something profound: kindness is never wasted. Courage is never forgotten. And love, true, selfless, sacrificial love, can change the trajectory of not just one life, but many. The blizzard that night had been -11 degrees. It had been deadly, dangerous, and terrifying. But it had also been the storm that brought her home. As she looked down at her sleeping daughter, at her son playing with his father's watch chain, at the man who looked at her like she hung the stars, Elena made a silent promise. She would spend the rest of her life being the warmth in someone's blizzard. She would stop for every overturned car, extend her hand to every stranger, love with everything she had. Because that was the lesson of that frozen night: sometimes the poorest person in the room has the richest gift to give. Sometimes an act of simple kindness opens doors to extraordinary futures. Sometimes fate wraps itself in snow and wind and forces you to become the hero you never knew you could be. And sometimes, just sometimes, a billionaire arrives the next day. But the real treasure was never the money. The real treasure was the love that started it all. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that kindness always comes back in unexpected ways, hit like and subscribe for more life-changing stories that celebrate the extraordinary power of ordinary people. Share this with someone who needs to believe in miracles today, because as Elena discovered on that frozen mountain road, miracles are often just courage dressed in patched coats and worn-out boots.